All right, so I'm here with Kaitlyn and Alan to nuke the moon. But first, Alan has information from the government.
The US government is being responsible. And unlike certain other governments around the world, I know, but hold on.
That's a
Unlike
big
certain other
statement.
governments around the world that are apparently encouraging or even working in cahoots with cybersecurity companies that are selling hacking tools, and these hacking tools are being used to hack journalists and privacy advocates and dissident politicians. The
Yeah.
US government, everyone will be very happy to know, has implemented a new set of rules issued by the Bureau of Industry and Security, regulating exactly what cyber weapons can and cannot be shared and with what countries. And so this new document, which is linked here, states all the rules and goes through its relevance to the Wassenaar Agreement, which regulates conventional weapons and has since been expanded to include cyber weapons. And so this helps codify America's regulation of these cyber weapons, which really do have a lot of geopolitical consequences. It's not just for journalists and political dissidents, but potentially in the future for real armed conflict. We've heard a lot about the Gerasimov doctrine in Russia and how there's this theory of hybrid warfare or total warfare that includes cybersecurity. Well, it's just a given that future conflict will include a lot of cyber warfare. And so it's probably a good idea to regulate this and for the US government to limit via export controls and laws just what countries and entities are able to get their hands on this. So this is a good thing. And among the consequences of this is a list of who can and cannot get cyber weapons. And on the list are countries like Iran and North Korea and Russia and China. And so they are not able to get cyber weapons from the US.
Oh, okay.
So there you
It's
have
not
it.
the other way. It doesn't prevent us from like buying Celebrite from Israel.
I don't think so, not at all. And after all, NSO did have a number of customers in the US government,
Yeah.
a bunch of customers. So it doesn't go the other way. So
Okay.
that's quite a big loophole.
All right. I don't know if our weapons are, well, anyway, that's nice. I guess this is the latest version of the export controls that blocked everything around the turn of the millennium. You couldn't send XP out of the country or anything.
Well, it's a little less ridiculous than that.
I hope so. Yeah. Well, good. Well, it might be a good thing. I'm glad you explained it. I never heard of the BIS before.
Yeah, this is my first exposure to it too.
There's an awful lot of federal agencies. Well, anyway, I've got an article here from Eaton Works blog. This guy bought a jacuzzi, and I didn't know this, but I should have guessed. If you buy a jacuzzi these days, you get a smart jacuzzi that's got a web app and a app for your phone, and you can remotely control the temperature and stuff in the tub through your phone and other things. So that's what he got, a smart jacuzzi, and downloaded the app. And then he went to the website to log in, put the same login he used on the app, and it said he was unauthorized. But before it says you're unauthorized, there's a brief flash of another page. So he ran a screen recorder to get it. And the other page is the administration page, all full of user data that flashes for a fraction of a second before it decides you're unauthorized. And so he went into it and discovered that it detects if you're an administrator through JavaScript running apparently on the client. So he's able to just modify it with a proxy and become administrator and get on that admin panel. And then he found another admin panel by reverse engineering the app. And he was able to similarly modify the client side validation and get in that. So he could get in everybody's account and extend their length and cancel their account and everything else. So then he tried to tell the manufacturer and couldn't get them to do anything at all, of course, for like 6 months. Wouldn't even answer emails or make any sense. But he eventually went around various other approaches and got them to fix it. So it's the usual Internet of Things nonsense. and a company that doesn't know enough about security to secure their stuff. And the most common web app vulnerability, they don't understand the difference between code running on the server and code running on the client. So anyway, kind of a fun article and kind of thing that our students should all understand in great detail from the web app hacking and exploit development classes, a nice series of steps, finding the vulnerabilities in the system. And then Kaitlyn has found out things about Mega.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. Mega is not as secure as they claim to be. So Ars Technica has an article. And it's an article really about this blog post right here, which is, and it has a logo, it has its own website, this attack.
Oh,
it's called
wow.
megaarray.io, so you know this is serious.
Let's see the logo. I mean, vulnerabilities don't matter unless they have a logo.
Right, so it's just lightning and stuff.
That's not much of a logo.
Here you go. This is their logo, Hacking Mega. It's a cat. They think like me.
That's a meme. That's not a real logo. This is not a real attack. Okay.
It has its own website. I mean, this is the real deal. So what's going on? Well, Mega, if you store your companies on the cloud on Mega, they say that your files are totally secure. And they're not entirely secure, as it turns out. So what can you do? So when you upload a file onto Mega, it's going to be encrypted using a public key encryption system. And it turns out that that same public key encryption system is also used in the login process. And you can essentially then log in a bunch of times to run an Oracle attack. So essentially what you do is you log in, and then you can see if the private key is larger or smaller than a value, than an arbitrary value. So of course, then you play 21 questions. Or in this case, 512 or 1024. It would be 1024 using a binary search, but using lattice cryptanalysis, you can get it down to about 512. And you can use that to figure out what the private key is to decrypt the user's files. And there's no easy fix to this. This is a fundamental problem in the way that Mega stores its data.
Yeah.
So now I don't know anyone who would actually store their files on Mega, but presumably there are people out there doing this, and they should know that it is not entirely secure.
Oh, yeah. Of course, this was one of those exotic attacks that's wildly impractical. You would have to run software on the Mega system, and you'd have to get 512 instances of people typing in their password. So it's in principle insecure, but in practice, it's extremely unlikely that anybody's actually done this attack.
Well, what you could do is if you know someone's password.
Oh, well, then you totally get into everything.
Then you can probably get it at anything. But you can run a man-in-the-middle attack. And that's where you would probably get the private key from. Is not from having the user log in 512 times. You man in the middle their login attempt 512 times, and then get their private key, let them log in, and then you have their private key.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, it's all right. I don't think that would work. I think they said you actually had to type in the password 500 times. So it would only be people who had been snooping on for like years.
So let me go back to the original paper here.
Yeah.
And by the way, I love hacking papers because it's so easy to read. Unlike a lot of dense papers that are published for peer review. So since the server code is not published, we cannot implement a proof of concept, but they implemented a man-in-the-middle attack. So this is exactly what they did in their proof. They actually did create a man-in-the-middle attack. They allowed the attacker to impersonate Mega. And they uploaded a video where the victim logs in, and then the attacker hijacks the login and replaces the correct session ID with their probe for the next secret hit.
Yeah.
And then then based on the client's response, the victim updates its internal interval for the binary search for the RSA prime factor, et cetera, et cetera. So it was actually a man-in-the-middle attack that they were able to grab the private key.
And the victim didn't have to log in many times.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, good. Well, that makes it more of a severe weakness.
Right.
All right. And
My volume is low. Let me see if I can.
oh no, yours is high. Kate,
Oh.
yours is higher than Alan. I say Alan should turn his up. We'll see if he has. Yours is fine. Yeah, Alan's discovered that San Francisco is a failed city.
Well, first of all, can you hear me properly now?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
good. Now you're the same as Kaitlyn.
Okay, good. Yes, I have an article to talk about. It is from the Atlantic magazine, and this article was written by a journalist by the name of Nellie Bowles. And Nellie Bowles has some very important observations to make about how San Francisco has become a failed city. I only talk about this article because I've read this very article, or what seems like this very article, dozens of times over the past several years. It's become something of a microgenre, both in so-called liberal publications and in Republican or conservative publications, to badmouth San Francisco and everything that's wrong with the city, and how somehow it is emblematic of larger problems with cities in America, with the Democratic Party, with Nancy Pelosi and San Francisco values, or in this case, with progressives. And so I just want to dissect this article and critique it for a minute, because I'm tired, very tired of reading these articles. And so I'm going to inflict upon all of you some of my grievances, just so that I can spare everybody the hardship of reading this article. It is over 8,000 words, I counted. I'll just give you a very quick summary. First of all, and by the way, I said microgenre for a reason, because they all follow a certain structure, like all genre writing. And in this genre, the author, first of all, makes it very clear that they are a fan of San Francisco. They love San Francisco. It's a beautiful city. If they're conservative, they grumble about the politics. If they are not a conservative, they then talk about how they're actually really a liberal. They are a true liberal. And Nellie Bowles is no exception. She is a true liberal. She grew up in San Francisco. She loves San Francisco. And then she goes on to talk about all the problems in San Francisco, and there are real problems. I'm not trying to minimize them, not trying to dismiss them. You just walk around certain neighborhoods in San Francisco and you can see it's, it's very bleak. It is, it's very hard to see sometimes. Anyway, she interviews a number of people in this article. She talks to Jackie Berlin, who is the mother of a man who has been living on the streets of San Francisco and has a substance abuse problem. It's addiction. And Jackie Berlin has appeared in countless videos and articles at this point. So, she's like a fixture in these articles. Bowles then goes on to talk about CVS and Walgreens and how those places claim to be shutting down stores because of shoplifting. Then she talks about Chesa Boudin, and this is really the core of the article. Chesa Boudin, the now recalled city attorney, district attorney, who was elected on a progressive platform, or nominally progressive platform, in which one of the main goals was to reduce the rate of incarceration and not prosecute people for minor offenses, or what he would consider minor offenses. Anyway, they move on from that, but really Chesa Boudin is the core of this whole article. Bowles then goes on to talk about NIMBYism, not in my backyard, and about how San Francisco progressives are to blame for blocking construction of more housing in San Francisco. But it's also the school board, the awful, awful school board of San Francisco, that is horribly progressive and is getting in the way of children's education. And then she caps it off with interviews with the mayor, London Breed, and then finally with a Twitter personality, Michelle Tandler, who is also I've been following her on Twitter, and she's very keen to present herself as a liberal also, but we'll talk about Tandler later. Anyway, it's this long litany, and it does take 8,000 words to get through all of this. But here comes my critique of the whole situation. Obviously, it's a genre work, and we've heard all this before. So there's no new information here. I can promise everybody there's not a word in here that you haven't read already in all of these San Francisco's going to hell in a handbasket stories. So what is really the point of this article? Well, it has to do with Chesa Boudin. And it has to do with the fact that this article was published just before the recall on Boudin. Now, I'm not going to get into a defense or a prosecution of Boudin myself. That's a topic for another time. But my point here is that everyone has an axe to grind, including Nellie Bowles, and perhaps especially Nellie Bowles. And I'm not trying to make this an ad hominem attack, although I am going to point out that this is really bad journalism, and that she should know better because she is a graduate of the Columbia Journalism School and formerly worked at a number of high-profile publications like the New York Times. The problem with this is that it is a personal essay and a critique, I guess you could say, of San Francisco politics and progressives that's masquerading as journalism. And it's not journalism. It's pure agitprop. And it's anti-progressive agitprop. I'm not trying to make a political statement myself here, other than I'm trying to critique some of the really shameful straw man arguments that are being made regularly in not only the Atlantic in this piece, but in also other so-called liberal media outlets, such as the New York Times and the Washington Post. And you can Google San Francisco progressives and failed, and you will find a slew of articles from these so-called liberal publications as recently as in just the past couple of weeks. So really, this article should be situated in a larger political conversation, because that's what it is. It's a political piece, and it's something of a anti-Chesa Boudin and anti-progressives hit piece. One of the big points of this article is NIMBYism and how the progressives are responsible for blocking construction of housing. And that's really not true, because San Francisco housing policy is exceedingly conservative, even if the people who claim to be progressives and who are blocking or who are also NIMBYists, they're not really progressives in that regard. Anyway, the larger point here is that Nellie Bowles has an axe to grind, and hers is that she's not really what she claims to be, as just a dispassionate observer and a fan of San Francisco. She's really part of an old guard of San Francisco, and has her own, shall we say, political interests, vested political and elitist interests in San Francisco. If you look at the Wikipedia article for Nellie Bowles, one of her ancestors was, in the late 19th century, one of the largest and richest cattle barons and landowners in all of America. So, and she grew up on Russian Hill. So let's be very clear about this. She has left San Francisco. She has moved away from San Francisco. But unlike so many stories that we read about in this microgenre about where people are forced to move from San Francisco, she chose to leave San Francisco. And part of this choice was, I think, informed or was precipitated by her partner, Barry Weiss, who was a opinion writer at the New York Times, who got drummed out of the New York Times because Weiss was very vocally supportive of Senator Tom Cotton's opinion piece in the New York Times that came out during 2020, in which he was not only very critical of the protests happening around the country back then, Black Lives Matter protests, but in which he was basically calling, no, not basically, but he's explicitly calling for US military intervention, which of course you cannot do, not since the late 19th century. So it's really part of a larger ideological and political conflict that's going on within the Democratic Party. And San Francisco is just a stand-in and a punching bag and a straw man for these anti-progressive arguments. Anyway, that is my very long, I won't call it a diatribe because I think it was better informed than a diatribe.
All right. Well, it's pretty interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I saw that link, Alan, and I normally don't click on other people's links before the podcast, but I saw that one and I just had to click it. I was just face palming, not another one of these articles. And of course, then I saw it and I'm like, who is this Nimrod writing this article? So I went on Wikipedia and I found the author's credentials and everything. And one of the things that's really disappointing is that Alan's right. This is a genre. This is a genre of conservatives, conservatives who are also like liberals that want to go after progressives, as well as progressives who don't think that San Francisco is progressive enough and they just want to badmouth it. Everyone just wants to take a swing at San Francisco, regardless of the political aisle. But in particular, I've seen the strongest comes from the conservatives. And so a few months ago, I was in Southern California and I was meeting some old friends who were living obviously in the area. And they knew I was living in the Bay Area near San Francisco. And a lot of them were concerned for my safety and well-being because I was, living in or around San Francisco. Now, of course, we are from San Francisco. Most of the people on this podcast have lived there either recently or still living in San Francisco. And it's really not that bad, especially when you compare it to a lot of other big cities. Like Detroit or New York or any of those other big cities. It's actually very nice. But of course, there's all these hit pieces. And it's just gone to the point where people people who feed into that conservative media diet are my friends who feed into that diet are concerned for my safety and have so much anxiety about San Francisco. And it's upsetting to see.
Yeah. I remember my friends in the Midwest would just assume I must be gay if I'm from San Francisco. And, I reassured them that you have to act gay in public, but if you're quiet about it, they won't deport you for not being gay. But anyway.
Right. I mean, but the whole new thing about San Francisco being dangerous, being a failed city, that has been a recent talking point, probably in the last decade or so that I've seen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of all the homeless people are the main obvious thing everybody sees.
But the thing about homelessness in San Francisco is that it's always been an issue, or it has been since the late 70s. I was doing some reading into this, and so many mayoral administrations have come and gone just because of homelessness. Art Agnos got booted out in the late 80s. I think it was 1988. He lasted only one term, in large part because of the quote unquote homelessness problem in San Francisco.
Yep, they always say they're going to fix it and nobody can ever fix it. Well,
that's just the thing. And his successor, Frank, I'm forgetting his last name, but he lasted from, I think it was, Agnos was 88 to 92, and his successor, Frank something or other, the former police chief, lasted from 92 to 96. He implemented the so-called Matrix program, in which the police went around ticketing people for sleeping rough on the street or otherwise loitering. And if these people could not then pay tickets, then they would be arrested and put in jail for non-payment. So they weren't being arrested for being homeless. They were being arrested for sleeping rough and then not paying the tickets that they were given for that. Anyway.
And I imagine that did not solve the problem.
It absolutely did not solve the problem. Willie
Yeah.
Brown came along, and then he came along with the pledge to do away with the Matrix program, but then he was flying helicopters with infrared cameras to find encampments in Golden Gate Park. And then, like it just keeps going on and on and on. And people like to complain about this, and it's a real problem. But it seems like a lot of people in San Francisco who are complaining about the quote unquote homelessness problem really aren't interested in addressing the issue, the very real issue with people being unhoused in San Francisco. It's that they just quote unquote don't want to see it. And the drug problem bothers them. Mm-hmm. And of course, nobody wants to see it. And the drug use is troubling, but it's being framed in the context of what the housed people of San Francisco want. What do I don't want to see it, rather than what can I do to help people who are currently unhoused or homeless?
Well, I can tell you right now, I mean, a lot of the homeless conversation revolves specifically around San Francisco for some reason. And it's really a California problem. California has more homelessness than any other state. I mean, it's a statewide, like I said, a statewide issue. And there are almost, so in 2019, and I assume this has gone up, there were about 10,000 homeless people in San Francisco. And that's a lot, I fully admit. However, Los Angeles has 6 times as much at about 60,000 homeless people. And so while we're talking about all this homelessness in San Francisco, the vast majority of homeless people in the state are actually in Los Angeles.
And probably not very happy about it.
And yes, I'm probably not very happy. So, the people, I mean, like I said, my friends in Southern California who are complaining about homelessness and dangerous stuff going on in San Francisco are actually the ones who have more homelessness, around them.
So clearly the homeless people in Los Angeles should move to San Francisco where it's nicer.
Clearly. I mean, it would be great if, the problem with homelessness that I've seen firsthand, especially working with less privileged communities, is that people have this idea that homeless people are those people you see on the streets who are up doing drugs. They're, they can barely function. And those are the homeless people that are visible. And that's kind of what gets into people's heads. And I agree, those people are sort of unsolvable, unfixable. I have no idea what to do with these people. I'm not saying that none of them have any chance to get their lives together, but there are resources available. If you are homeless, you just have to, stay off drugs and, do some good deeds. That people just get into their head, that's what homelessness looks like. And that's not what homelessness typically looks like. In fact, the vast majority of homeless people that you will find, you do not know they're homeless.
Right. Yep. Well, Andrew Yang has a solution for it, but he doesn't seem to be winning. Anyway, there's a new Windows NTLM relay attack. There's been an old one from last year, and this is the latest version of the same thing. So you can do a man-in-the-middle attack, essentially, and relay the NTLM packets, and you're able, as a domain user, to elevate yourself to domain administrator. However, when the previous one came out about a year ago, Microsoft had some countermeasures to prevent it, and those will also prevent the new one. So the thing to understand is if you set up a Windows domain controller, you really need to turn on quite a few optional features, like disabling NTLM and web services and enabling extended protection for authentication and signing. If you don't do that, then these attacks will allow users to elevate themselves to domain administrator, which is, of course, a bad thing. And then Kaitlyn has got NASA making nukes on the moon.
Yes, as they should. So TechCrunch has an article talking about NASA's power sources on the moon, which are likely going to be fission-based. Now, NASA is no stranger to nuclear power. In fact, a lot of probes and some of the Mars rovers run on nuclear power. However, they run on a very inefficient nuclear battery, essentially. They work on a thermoelectric nuclear generator, which is a fancy way of saying that if you put a bunch of plutonium in a box, it's going to give off heat, and you can just use that heat to generate a bit of electricity like a battery. And the nice thing about this, of course, is that the battery will last for decades. If you don't have to worry about solar panels getting clogged up, it looks like they actually want to create a fission-based reactor on the moon. I don't know how this is going to work. Most fission reactors on Earth work by, of course, boiling water. The boiling water turns turbines. Now, maybe they're just thinking about putting thermoelectric generators on the moon. The problem with thermoelectric generators is that, one, they require plutonium, and that's becoming harder and harder to source due to the fact that we don't make nuclear reactors that much anymore. And of course, plutonium is a byproduct of nuclear reactors. The other problem, of course, is that they don't generate much electricity. Like, they're great as batteries, essentially, but they're not going to power your station. So it'll be interesting what they come up with. But there are 3 companies in the loop to potentially get a winning bid for their fission-based energy platform. And that's Lockheed Martin, Westinghouse, and something called IX, which is Intuitive Machines and X Energy working together. And NASA's also partnering, of course, with the Department of Energy, because of course they are on this one. And the idea is that this will be a 40 kilowatt power generating lunar fission, nuclear fission device. So nuclear fission on the moon. Sam, you're muted.
Well, they're right. All right. And so Alan's got the sriracha shortage. Boy, I put this on Twitter and I got a lot of excitement. People were pretty horrified about this.
Yeah, this story's gotten a lot of traction out there. Huifeng, the manufacturer of the famous sriracha sauce with the rooster on the label and the little green cap on it, has said that there's a severe jalapeno pepper shortage, and that they will not really be able to fulfill orders for many months to come. Now, I found an article from NPR which goes into greater depth on this story, and it turns out that the harvest of the red jalapeno peppers, not the green, but the red jalapeno peppers, is indeed horrible this year in northern Mexico and in Southern California. And that very little of this crop is actually going to be harvestable. And the NPR story here talks to some academics. One, Professor Guillermo Murray Tortorolo at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, who says that this jalapeno shortage is due to climate change, and highly likely due to climate change. And this is because there is a 12,000 or 1,200 year drought that's going on, a mega drought in the southwest of the US and in northern Mexico currently. The last 22 years have been the driest in the past 1,200 years. And so this is an extreme drought with really no end in sight. And we've seen 2 cycles of La Nina that have affected the rainfalls in particular recently. So this shortage looks to be ongoing, possibly. It's not just this year. It's probably going to be an ongoing problem. I think possibly compounding the problem is that Huifeng, the manufacturer, has had some supply issues in the past several years. And this has not gotten any attention of late, but Huifeng used to get over 90% of its jalapeno peppers from just one grower in Southern California, I believe Southern California. And they had a contract dispute. And ultimately, Huifeng was ordered to pay their grower something like $22 or $24 million for a breach of contract, among other things. And I don't know about the viability of withSam as a manufacturer, actually, because this cannot be a high margin product. And even though it's widely distributed, they don't really have a product to sell right now if they can't get their supply from elsewhere. And it sounds like there isn't an elsewhere to be gotten.
So obviously you need to make an alternative product, but they probably wouldn't love that.
Yeah. Now there are plenty of other sriracha manufacturers out there, and including manufacturers from Thailand, which is where sriracha sauce originates from. So
Yeah.
you can still get your sriracha sauce from other sources, other manufacturers. I wouldn't panic about just yet, but it is going to taste differently because sriracha is usually made from cooked jalapeno peppers, whereas withSam does not cook them. So it delivers a different flavor.
Oh, Kaitlyn has obtained a visual aid, I think.
Right, for my next article.
Oh, excellent. Okay, not about the sriracha. All right. Well, I've got one here from Krebs on security about paper receipts. There's a restaurant that was closed because they lost a bunch of money. And what happened is there are these signs, I've seen them in restaurants that say, if you don't get a receipt with your purchase, you'll get $10 back. And I never knew what that was about. And this is what it's about. If you don't do that, then the cash register operator can take money from the customer, give them the food, and then cancel the order so no receipt is printed, give the person change and put the money in their pocket. So they just steal the money from the till and it never passes through your accounting system. This is a common form of fraud, and that's the defense, is to require a receipt. And this restaurant didn't do that, but they noticed that when the two people that normally ran the cash register were on vacation and they made much more money those nights, and discovered that they had been doing it to the tune of stealing $100,000 a year this way. And now he's on the hook not only to recover that money, but also to pay all the taxes on those transactions that were not properly recorded. So that's interesting. It reminds me of when you go to the movie theater, they give you a piece of paper and then there's a separate person to tear that piece of paper in half. And it's the same thing to make sure that no one person can let their friends in for free. I thought it was an interesting security control. All right, and then we've got Kaitlyn with daycare monitoring apps. Yeah.
Well, apparently there are these monitoring apps that show your kid at their childcare. So this article actually gets The Verge wrote the article by Corin Faith. And I'm going to call out Corin Faith on this a little bit because daycare usually refers to like older people, like people who are elderly. They go to daycare. When you put kids into someone else's control for a while to be taken care of, that's called childcare. So this is actually talking about childcare, not daycare. But what happened is that a researcher from CertBot looked at a bunch of apps that are supposed to look at what kids are doing during the day and report back to the parents. And some of these apps included Brightwheel, Hi Mama, and Tadpoles. And all of them had pretty severe security vulnerabilities, including lacking two-factor authentication, which for product monitoring your child is kind of actually important. Now, I am not one of those people that says you should throw 2FA on everything, but the things that are really important, yes, you absolutely should have 2FA. And this seems like one of those things, but of course it doesn't have it. The other big problem with these apps that they found is that they are not going by their own privacy policy. So they are sharing data with entities like Facebook when they say they're not, for example. And so there's very little, and also the apps have very little in terms of security controls. They can be man in the middle. I mean, there's a whole host of problems with these apps, unsurprisingly. And so, it's just only something to think about when you start using Internet of Things devices or apps to monitor your children, which brings me to my visual aid here, my new laptop that I will be hacking. This is by Leapfrog. We'll see how this works. But yeah, definitely these children's toys are very interesting from a security perspective, because obviously they don't have security in mind. But a lot of these devices targeted towards kids or kids and their parents are internet connected, and that creates a big problem.
So this child care monitoring thing is like a webcam looking at the location where your kid and all the other kids are? Is that what it
Apparently
is?
so. Apparently so. So I'm going to quote part of the article here.
Yeah.
Says, quote, "At first, there was a lot of comfort in seeing my daughter during the day with the images they were sending me." So you see, they do send images. "Then I was looking at the app like, huh? I don't really see security controls I would normally see in most services like this." So yes, they are sending images. They are monitoring the children. It's really important for software like that to be as secure as possible.
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's it for this one. And we'll be back on Friday, and it'll be in the evening on Friday again, because I'm teaching in daytime again. Farewell.